Kelly.
Here.
Counselor Tabor.
Here.
Counselor Lombardi.
Here.
And I'm Counselor Cook, and I am here. And we have with us Deputy City Manager Suzanne Woodland. Our first item on the agenda is to review the minutes from the September 9th, 2024 meeting. Did everyone have a chance to look through the minutes?
Yes.
Could I get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All right. All in favor? Aye. Okay. The minutes are approved. We will continue our discussion today of the administrative ordinance review, starting with the discussion of procurement procedures, disposal of real estate, and disposition of surplus property that was included in the packet. Hopefully this is the last day of changes for this section. So I'm going to share it here on the screen for those at home. And let me see if I can zoom in a little bit so it's a little bit more visible for everyone. There we go. And I'm going to turn it over to Deputy City Manager Suzanne Woodland to guide us through these changes.
So in follow-up to the last meeting of the Governance Committee, one of the things we wanted to make sure was crystal clear is that the processes and documentation and standards that we would be applying for procurement would be transparent and public to both vendors and residents and all businesses that were interested. So originally I was thinking maybe we just stick the word publish in there somewhere, and then I thought, well, maybe a full sentence would be helpful. So what I had proposed is the procurement system and policies shall be communicated and circulated in such forms as to provide transparency to vendors and the public. Let's see. So there's that one. Also, we had discussed at the last meeting wanting to kind of give more clarity and visibility to what we call emergency and sole source purchases. So you'll see that I specifically call that out in section 1.500, which is one of the things that we attempt to capture, which we do capture in our current procurement policy, is what those standards are for emergency and sole source purchases, how we define them, and the limitations on that. And then using two definitions below under section 1.501 to describe emergency purchases, and following that, sole source purchases. So both of those have now been defined. Would certainly be more than willing to take any feedback on those definitions, trying to capture really some of the criteria that we use internally. And obviously, as we've talked about, the ordinance is kind of the general guideline, but it is typically our practice to put even more boundaries and processes on this process, or all of our procurement processes. So really this is the high level outline and roadway, and then we further define it within our policies, such as our current procurement manual, which will be updated once we pass this ordinance, and as we begin to adopt an online portal, we'll be needing to update that and supplementing and adjusting policies to make it all work and mesh together. But the goal is, again, this high-level framework and goals and policies, and then we'll get it implemented. So there are those changes, and then...
I'm going to pause just a second. I think
that
Councilor
works.
Lombardi has a question.
Yeah, just a couple
Sure.
questions. I mean, they're just definitions, I guess. Exercise positive financial control. I guess I don't understand the word positive in that, and I wonder if appropriate is a better word.
Sure. Which definition is that
That's
in?
C.
That is in.
That's in
Oh, so we're back up onto
Yeah,
something
C,
that's
yeah.
older. You know, that would be the term that came from accounting as positive, which I assumed for them meant something very kind of specific, as in, you know, it's not, I always think of it as not reactive. It's, here is the the process which you are going to follow that meets our internal controls, that meets our, within our budget line, line items. That's how I've always understood them to use it, that it is proactive to make sure we are following the requirements of the charter, the ordinance, and then our own internal
That's
controls.
their language, and that's fine. I mean,
Okay.
I just,
Yep.
I
Yep.
just, and then the other thing in 501,
Yep,
the sentence, "Emergency procedures shall be further defined and managed by the procurement system." Is the machine defining, or are people defining, I guess? And that's the question
Sure.
I had. And so my suggestion would be further defined and will be managed by the procurement system.
sure, I like that. I like that. It's true. The system itself will not define it, but it will set boundaries on it in
Yeah.
the sense of, as I understand, not only with this procurement module, but when we look at our new financial software, it's going to have all kinds of, layers to it in terms of who can, submit for what, and who has sign-off authority on certain purchases of certain amounts and types. So there's internal controls that way within the software itself.
Yeah, this is just,
So I do like the refinement of will be managed.
I just, with the rise of AI, I don't want the machine defining things rather than people.
No,
And that goes, again,
Same thing. Yep.
defined and managed by,
Yep. Yep, I see it in the sole source, yeah.
yeah.
Yep. No, I think that's a logical change. That makes sense. Yes.
Those are my only comments on this.
Did everyone catch those changes? Okay,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, and I really liked the opening statement where we've made the implicit explicit, that we're going to make this transparent and communicate how the whole process works. It might be smart when we have a new document for it to have the link in here. But
Yes. Yep.
And I think when we have this whole, having that link to whatever manual we do have in existence,
I think that
there is still one.
I think the tricky part is the way we right now publish our ordinances. Links are tricky because we just do them as a PDF document.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean, so yep, we can work on that. When we've looked at some software actually to go to a publication platform, it would actually have, not within the ordinance itself, but like a resources
Yes.
element. So that's, as soon as we get a little bandwidth, we're going to go back to looking at publication software to be able to better capture the resources that tie to the ordinances, so.
As long as they're available
coming.
somewhere,
Yes.
online, so
Yep.
so people aren't putting in information requests just to find it.
Yep.
What the manual looks like. That can be tedious for staff to produce.
Concur, yep. Good. Before I continue on the other changes, anything else on sole source, emergency purchases? Okay.
Thank you for going through and defining these.
yeah,
No, that
that's
was a
better.
great idea. You'll see there's just a small change we got to fix with the provide adequate notice to bidders. Again, fewer words are generally better in my world. Okay, so going to the disposition of real estate, we've changed mobile to manufactured home. We all were in concurrence on the 50,000, which is consistent with other parts of the ordinance and frankly what stuff is valued at nowadays. The tax collector shall make a recommendation to the city manager as to the disposition of the manufactured home by sale or otherwise, with the intent to recoup as much of the taxes owed as possible, as well as such additional monies as may be negotiated. So again, as we talked about, often the manufactured homes don't have value and actually have more liability depending on how old they are, whether they're single wide, and of course the ongoing rent related to that. We did add the language we talked about to give the tax collector discretion with regard to exercising rights under state law to take property by tax lien. And so it says the tax collector shall have no obligation to take by tax deed any property with environmental contamination or other liabilities that outweigh the value of the taxes likely to be recovered. I thought that kind of captures
The dry cleaning business.
yeah, just being mindful of exercising that statutory option that we have, which I thought was a great addition. So that's what we have for those changes.
Are there any further questions?
Seems ready to bless.
Okay. If everyone is comfortable with this, I'm going to go ahead and ask that we suspend the rules and move up public comment just on this item before we finally adopt it to move it forward.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Is there any public comment?
Perfect. Thank you.
Peter Huda, 280 South Street. So, first of all, I would like to remind this committee of the city charter, section 7.1, and this, or 7.2 actually, this is the purchasing procedure. The city council by ordinance shall establish a purchasing and contract procedure, which shall include the assignment of the responsibility of purchases to a single individual for the combination of purchasing and other similar articles. That person is the purchasing coordinator, or it used to be the purchasing manager. I do not know who is here now. And the next thing I'd like to call to your attention is I have the old number 5.02. And since nobody is here to represent finance or auditing, I'd like to call your attention to the separation of duties here and internal controls, which is a very important part of internal controls. And from reading what you have here, it really looks like we don't have a purchasing manager or a purchasing person doing anything here. Everything is running through the city manager. There's no separation of duties, which is a big part of internal controls. So I urge you to look at that carefully, and I would urge you to send this through the audit committee or the external auditors to review this before you put this forward. There is also a state RSA that deals with this. I think it's 21-something, RSA 21, that deals with this specifically. The other thing I want to call to your attention is it doesn't really matter if Concord has a $50,000 limit for their controller or for their city manager. The state has different rules, and we need to abide by that. Also, when you're delving into the finance part of the administrative code, there are other rules that apply here. There's GADSB, which is the general accounting, governmental accounting practices. There's GAAP, and there's a whole bunch of other stuff. And since Nathan isn't here, and I really didn't hear him make any comments last time, and I watched your last one, I think you need to get farther into the finance part instead of just going over this and changing it yourself. Because before you bring this to council, it needs to be run by the finance department and probably the auditors, because this previous code was approved by the auditors to comply with internal controls and with separation of duties. And what you're doing here now seems to be against the Charter, 7.2, and against the internal controls. The other thing I want to bring up here, since I had not noticed, I didn't notice that the audit committee had a meeting. So I would like to ask, who is the chairman of the audit committee at this point in time? And who would be calling the meeting? I didn't see that you had a meeting to elect a chairman, which you put into your committee ordinances or policies last year. So I would really like to know who is going to be reviewing this from a finance perspective and from an auditing perspective. And those are some of the things that you really need to look at before you start moving forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? I don't see if there's anyone else on Zoom. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close public comment on these changes. And is there any further discussion? Yes.
I'll just respond that the Finance Department has reviewed these changes. However, if the Governance Committee would like me to, take further action before we bring it forward for a proposed first reading to run it by the audit firm, happy to do that. I do believe we're in compliance with the charter, and as we've discussed, the ordinance is really the beginning of a framework and not the whole of the framework, and the internal controls are built not only into the way we organize and set responsibilities within municipal government, but also within the new software that we'll be looking to adopt, which will have different sign-offs, and some people can sign off on things and other people can't. So, but I'm happy to run this by others. But this has gone through legal and finance, but certainly can touch base with the auditors on this if that would please the committee.
I have one other question. We still do have a purchasing coordinator that coordinates all of our purchases.
We do still have a purchasing coordinator, yes. Yep. Procurement, now we've called her. Yep. Yep.
Are there any
But
other-
it is not the way we have it. Obviously, when she's out on vacation, there's someone else who covers those same duties. And I think that's really what we're trying to get at, which is there are systems in place, because you never want a single point of failure if you can avoid that. So there is someone who has backup responsibilities for that position, but that goes into defining the roles and responsibilities within the finance department. Only certain people write checks, and only certain people approve, adding new employees, and those two are not the same. So there are columns, if you will, for that purpose. But like I said, I'm happy to get it, do a double check and make sure our auditors are comfortable with this if the governance committee would like that.
And I have one further question. It's also, I don't want to go too far into the audit process, but it is my understanding the auditors every year look at our internal controls and make
Yes.
sure that our internal controls are adequate.
So,
Jaber.
in terms of separation of duties, we would want the external auditor and our finance people to make sure that whoever can make a requisition for a payable is not the person who approves. That's the separation.
So there are multiple steps, yes, in any acquisition process, with different people handling different steps of that. From a, supervisor at the Public Works Department who may buy a part to fix a truck, and then that goes through a process pursuant to which there's a purchase order, there's a sign-off within the department, there's a sign-off within the procurement side, purchase, do you have a line item to charge that against? And then later, there's a different flow for actually issuing the payment. And those are all separate processes.
as long as any of the approvers can't make the requisition request.
I think I understand what you're asking. The
The vulnerability would be if the person who approves can also create
create a requisition.
a requisition, or
Yeah.
what are we calling them?
Purchase order.
Purchase order, yeah.
And the only time that something like that would occur is if the finance department is purchasing for the finance department supplies, and then they have separation.
Right.
Is my understanding.
Yes, and approvals. Yep.
I mean, typically, the approvers would all be department heads or fairly high up.
It depends on the amount of the purchase, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a structure and a process
Okay.
within it is in the purchasing manual. It's pointed out. Yep.
Would you, how long would it take to run, just to show the auditors to make sure that they don't have any issues with this? Jane?
This doesn't seem particularly complex, so I'd like to think it shouldn't be too long. So I'm happy to find out and report back. I could say if they have no issues, then we can just bring it forward to first reading. If they have some issue or concern, then I can bring it back to governance.
I think that that's reasonable, if, as long as we're not creating work and increasing costs somewhere unintentionally. then-
It depends on how much time and effort they put in. They answer questions for us on a regular courtesy basis. If we're looking at something that, we're wondering how to treat something, we might pick up the phone and get a quick answer on what their experience is and double check a rule. So they've been quite easy to work with, helpful. So.
Would everyone here be comfortable with that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So then, if that's the case, I would request a motion to move this forward to the council pending approval by the auditing firm.
Yep.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Okay. Then we will go ahead and move this forward, but we will make sure that we have approval.
If there's any issue or if they decline to look at it because it's too much of a legal interpretation, I don't know. But if there's any issue, I will bring it back to the governance committee and report back.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is the separation of financial administrative ordinances into Chapter 2. If you'll remember from our last meeting, there was a discussion that Chapter 2 is non-existent right now. It's just a hold right now in the ordinances for future use. But at this stage, we have enough various financial ordinances that it might make more sense to create Chapter 2. So, thank you.
Yeah, so, and I did email you the document.
Okay.
So,
I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to share that with everyone.
so actually it was Chapter 1, Article 2 that was reserved. But when you actually went to Chapter 2 on our ordinance, it only had 3 small things. So, we'll wait a minute until we get it pulled up.
Back to
Yep.
share. Here's what we have. I'll try to, can everyone read that?
Yep. So,
Larger.
in our current Chapter 2, you will see that there is a section that deals with the city seal, with, I believe it's elections, and there's one other thing that's in there, city seal, elections, and it may be, I forget which one is in there now. One other out of here. And so they could easily be moved. And so what I've done is, just for discussion purposes, under administrative code, tried to, without moving too many items in the existing Chapter 1, because obviously then we have to tie back to other parts of the ordinance to, kind of move things around a little bit in a way that makes them clearer, and also to flag what we're still looking to edit and update. So we've got, right now, our current Article 1 deals with just the municipal organization, and that's, updating, mostly small items, which have to do with like planning and sustainability. Like we've changed some titles. We now have an IT department. Municipal emergency communications, that was further down in Chapter 1. Just pulling that up because it's sort of part of the organization, and then that allows us, boards, commissions, and authorities to stay put and not need to move around. Elections, there's some older language in there that probably needs to be updated now that I've looked at it. So pulling that over into Chapter 1. There's a small couple of sentences on what the city seal is in the existing Chapter 2, pulling that over. Then we have validity and precedence. Again, that's in Chapter 1 now. That would stay the same, but it could use some updated language. Code of ethics, obviously, we've worked on last year with governance. Conflicts of interest worked on last year, so didn't change that. Municipal enforcement procedures, literally just pulling that up in Chapter 1, but we do have some edits about how we might reorganize that. I know Jane Freeney's been working on that piece, and I think she talked to you, Councillor Cook, about some structural changes. Then we have prohibited practices in public buildings. Oh, that was probably the other one that might have been in Chapter 2 that I just pulled over to, frankly, make Chapter 2 all about finance. And so that's what we've got coming, and I thought it would be helpful to indicate where we've still got edits and what we're not working on, because you already worked on it. And then for Chapter 2, really we're probably most of this, we know we've got the procurement procedures in there that we're hopefully close to, pulling out the disposition of property and making it its own separate heading, the payment by credit card, and then funding of public art seemed kind of logical to put it under the finance because it's about funding, but I'm not fixed on that. So if you like it better somewhere else. But since we were doing leave at termination fund, the municipal fund balance, I was like, maybe, but I could easily put it, I'm not fixed, which is why this is just a discussion to see how does this look, or maybe it even belongs somewhere else in the ordinance book. So
Yeah, this is challenging. It maybe belongs there. It's kind of like parking and traffic safety. The committee itself is established in a completely different section. As long as we have that reference under commissions and authorities, it's not unreasonable. Yeah.
So that's what we've got coming, and like I said, I'm not wedded to any of this. It was just my first stab at kind of letting us have a roadmap for where we're coming. I think we're pretty close. Probably by the next meeting, you can have so the suggested changes, to the municipal organization, cleaning up the language there. Same thing with the emergency communications. Like most of the rest of Chapter 1 is pretty close, other than maybe the. I think Jane is getting close on the enforcement piece based on what she shared with me today. So you might have really the remainder of that Chapter 1 ready to go by the next meeting.
How does everyone feel about this reorganization?
Sounds logical to me.
Yeah.
I think it is.
I know that one of the things I struggled with in working on the Code of Ethics and the conflict of interest, the mandatory disclosure section, is that the section on elections isn't there. So it feels like it's out of the blue when you get to that.
Yes.
And then have credit card procedures right
Right.
after. It feels,
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm confusing right now. So I think that reorganization is really helpful. We might have, I don't know if we have other sections that have to be also massaged that are not in chapter 1.
I debated but did not have time to go through and look at the other chapters, but I was going to do that. I figured I'd get your input on this first, and then I'd do a quick skim and see, is there anything else that is jumping out logically? And I would invite you, if something is nagging at you, like, why is that in chapter, 7, when it's so logically here? If there's something that jumps out at you, let me know. But that's why this was the first conversation, to see, does this make some logical sense? And then we could take a quick look for.
Yeah, I think that the only other, there's a section on fines that maybe but we probably need to look at it anyway, because it's probably extremely outdated. So that probably needs to be reviewed and considered for the finance section.
Yep.
Potentially. But some of it is tied to things that we don't do anymore either, so.
Yep. And fines really go under that municipal enforcement procedures.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes, exactly. So this is that, that's where there's a little gray area, but yes, yeah, we need to, there are a lot of ordinances that we have in the city that have evolved over many years.
Yes.
There must
Process
be-
of accretion.
Yes.
Yes, it's kind of like the committees that we reviewed last year,
Yeah.
and we had committees that, just hadn't met in 15 years. So now, this looks good for now, and I'm sure that we can start going through and kind of revisiting this if we need to.
Yep.
Before we present all the changes to the council.
Right.
I wanted to get the committee's take on how we want to proceed with some of these, because we're going to have all these individual sections, and we can present them as a group to the council. So like we could look through anything that's urgent we want to do. One of the reasons that we're addressing purchasing, and we've been addressing purchasing, is that we're putting a new
software.
system online. So we want to get that ordinance change in place in time for the new system to go online. But in some of these cases, they're not as urgent changes, but they're changes that need to be made. Do we want to proceed by saying we're going to do everything that we want to put in the administrative code first in chapter 1, and then present that to the council? And then do everything else in chapter 2 we haven't covered and present it to the council? I think we're pretty close on that. It would just be adoption of fees. Changes.
I guess I would ask that if there are things that are pending from the staff point of view that might bring something forward, we should probably look at that first. But that's a question more than.
Yeah. My thought is to address text first, so the substance, with the thought that if we spend another couple months on the substance of the existing language, whether it's, making sure we update planning and sustainability and pieces like that, cleaning up the language that's outdated without changing the numbering system yet. And then, once we've done the text work, if you will, for chapter 1 and chapter 2, then we flag, don't get hung up on the numbers, because we'll restructure and come in with all right, not changing any text, we're just reorganizing, and get a single blessing on the reorganization of chapter 1 and chapter 2. Because that way, if someone does have some concern about text issues, they're divorced from the what number we're going to call it, and might be easier to make sure that, to the extent we can have consensus and agreement, that we're there on the text, knowing that it's just a numbering reorg piece that we do final cleanup. And then because that final cleanup, when we move things around, it would also include probably a page that says, you're going to also change these other, 10 or 12 other pieces within the rest of the ordinance that refer to X. So that's why I was thinking that renumbering, reorg becomes a separate act, and then it will have a sheet with all the tie-ins. And it's not substantive. It's literally just, we're moving things, so we've got to carefully go through. And like I said, we've got an OCR version of our ordinances, so it's a little easier now to just type in exactly this and find where it appears in the ordinance and do a simple, change and renumber to this. And technically, when you look at most of the ordinances that you pass, we usually put a couple of, sentences down at the bottom that gives the city clerk the authority to renumber and reorganize. I just think it would be better and more transparent if we kind of did it in a city council meeting so that the public and everyone can see, yes, we're moving things around a little bit, but it's all there. So I thought, rather than do it administratively after the fact, to do it very much, in a more public conversational setting, in part, so we just have more people aware that we're just cleaning things up.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That seems logical.
Yep.
So from the staff perspective, what should the governance committee be addressing at our next meeting? What do we think is going to come forward next?
So I think what, the procurement one is the big one, obviously. And then after that, I think our next meeting is in, 2 weeks?
Usually in 2 weeks.
2 weeks, yeah.
I didn't check.
I don't think I have it on the calendar for October 7th.
Don't think we do.
I think it's a little late. Is it the following
I
week?
feel like it's the 15th, October 15th.
I think so, too.
Oh, yeah,
the
we
day.
have it 15.
On a
15.
Tuesday.
Okay, so I would think we should have at least the edits to Article 1, Article 2, maybe even election, city seal, because it's really just some cleanup pieces.
Okay.
And, because I've got drafts of all of these. They just need a final look by others as well as
Okay.
as me. And people just need a little bandwidth. Adoption of fees, I know we've got coming, just to clean up the language there to make it, put some clarity into some things. You've got your art that's coming. So I think you'll have most of these other sections, if not all of them, to look at for your next meeting and draft. You may not get them till the Friday before, but it'll be our first look and our first conversation.
Right.
And I think most of them are not substantive. They're just trying to tighten the language, update the language to our current organization and pieces like that.
Okay. And so there's nothing that's urgent beyond where we are now.
No, procurement was the urgent one, given that we're hopeful to roll out that software.
Okay. Great. Does anyone have any final questions? Okay. With that, I'm going to go ahead then and take us back to public comment if there's any other further public comment on next procedures. Okay. Yes, we're having a short meeting today.
That's good. That's good.
The only announcement is that our next meeting is on October 15th at 11 a.m. That's a Tuesday, so just a heads up, everyone. Follows a holiday, so we're here on a Tuesday instead of a Monday. And does anyone else have any announcements? No? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
All right.
Aye.